Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode is once again brought to you by our friends over at Galactic Comics and Collectibles at galacticcomicsandcollectibles.com. We welcome Bram Stoker and British Fantasy Award nominated author of such books: A Child Alone with Strangers, Gothic, Boys in the Valley, D7, The Third Rule of Time Travel, and the upcoming Autumn Springs retirement home Massacre. Philip Fracassi to the podcast today to discuss these books and so much more. We even discussed at the very end with a little thing you didn't really maybe know about Philip Fracassi there. So make sure you listen. But before you do, check out Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, all those places. Give us a follow, like, whatever you want to do. Also, subscribe, rate, review, all those stuff over on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you find your podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, as well as always, you can go to capesandtights.com for so much more. This is Philip Fracassi, author of The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, coming out September 30th from Tor Nightfire. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome to the podcast, Philip. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm glad you were able to make it and chat here. I mentioned before, like I said, this is a new episode, our first episode of the new studio. So I was hoping that we can get it done. To me, I was like, maybe I was gonna have to call you and tell you, hey man, we can't do this. But no, we were able to set it up and get it ready to go, and we're ready here to talk. So yes, it's pretty cool to do this. But yeah, so welcome. Let's talk about how you got into writing. And so now don't go all the way back to when you first wrote your first word, but when did you really know that you really wanted to be an author? That's what you wanted to do. Was there a certain time? Was there like a moment, or was it just like, I guess that's what I'm doing now?
Well, I don't want to go too far back, like you said, but I will say that that moment did come early for me.
Okay.
Um, it came when I was like, it was in fifth grade, and our teacher had given us a creative writing assignment, and we were, whatever we were supposed to write, whatever we wanted, a story, and I wrote this like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pastiche, about, and I think I changed the names because I didn't want to be sued. And but and I remember vividly reading that story to my class, and people laughing and clapping at the end, and I was like, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. And then it was, when I got a little bit older, like junior high, I started seriously write. I mean, I was writing from that moment on. I was writing stories. I was
Mhm.
writing stories, crazy, funny, silly stories that kids write. But I was writing stories and stories and stories. And when I was in like seventh grade, I kind of got a little more serious about it. And it was when I really got into Stephen King and all that stuff. And that's when I was like, I want to do this for like a living. I
Mhm.
wanted this to be my career. And I remember I wrote a story called The Forest. Um, and it was like 100 pages, and it was about this monster dog that lived in the forest by this suburban cul-de-sac, and these kids had to like kill the dog and this monstrous beast. But yeah, so that was from that point on, I was hooked.
Mhm. That's it seems like it's one of those things that either people are like, I just started, or it's been going for a long time.
Yeah, no,
But yeah,
lifelong dream. Yeah.
that's awesome. It's one of those things that I always said to myself, I'd love to be able to write a book, but I feel like I just there's certain people who can do certain things, and not saying that I'll never write a book, but it's one of those things that I'll just leave it to the people who are really good at it, and I'll read those books, and that's about it. And I'll talk to those people. I'll let you do that, and I'll do this, and we'll
Right.
leave it at that. But yeah, it's always one of those things that I'm like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to do, but I never really grasped on. I mean, I didn't read well until I was like in high school, so it was like one of
Yeah.
those. I had to take reading classes, and so I got late reading in my life, let alone writing.
Yeah, I was always a big reader. It was just something I gravitate. It's just I think it's whatever that part of your brain is that
Mhm.
you just want to. It's like I can't learn foreign languages. I can't play musical instruments. You know what I mean? I gravitated right away toward reading and writing, and it's my lifelong passion. And so I'm very fortunate that at least as of recently, I'm able to do it
Mhm.
for a living. It's a real blessing for sure.
That's awesome. Yes, my entire family, I have two brothers, and my parents are all musically inclined. And I never really was, I could play the drums a little bit, like just enough to keep a
Right.
beat, but I never really could do it. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just manage bands then. So like I managed bands for a little while.
Right.
I was
I
always
did too.
okay. I was okay at sports, but I was like, I can't do this very well. So then I ended up managing the soccer team or writing about sports before I got into doing this pop culture
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it was kind of funny. I'm like, I wanted to be part of these things, but I really can't. But leave the, like I said, leave the stuff that you're good at to someone else, and then find
Yeah.
your place and find your attachment to it. And that's where I got into this. Is like I have attachment to to novels and to the story being told and such. And so I can talk this way and this side. Leave that to you. We'll make you have that one. But yeah, uh, but yeah. So that you floor slipping here. You have plenty of books now under your belt. You have a new one coming up. You have a couple that just came out. Where are these all stories that you've been working on for a while, and then you just find the place where their homes are and things like that? I mean, I'm talking a little bit. So you had the novella D7 that came out recently over at Shortwave Publishing. You
Yeah.
had the Third Rule of Time Travel that came out recently, and then you have the upcoming The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. I mean, these three stories are ones that you've been working on for a while, and they just finally hit the market, or is it something that came up more recently?
No, I wrote D7 earlier this year. Uh, and it just so happened that right around the time I was finishing it, um, Alan Latufska, probably
Yes.
butchering his name, at Shortwave, who's a great guy, great publisher, just kind of reached out and he was like, "Do you have anything?" Big fan kind of thing. And I said, "No, I just finished this story. It's about 10,000 words. If you're interested." And so that was no, that's something I just wrote. Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. I wrote uh last year.
Mhm.
Came up with the idea in late 2023 when I was touring for Boys in the Valley. So that's a new idea that I just wrote. So yeah, last Third Rule of Time Travel actually, contrasting with those two.
Yeah.
I had written that originally. Well, I never really actually. I wrote a screenplay based on the concept a few years ago, and and then nothing came of it, and I kind of moved on to doing other things. And then I think it was around 2022, give or take, a couple of years ago. Um, I just finished a book, and I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I remembered that I'd written that screenplay, and I kind of broke it back out, and I looked at it again, and I was like, well, it's science fiction,
Mhm.
which would be a different thing. But I was kind of like, I've written at that point. I've been publishing horror since 2014. So it'd been like a stretch. And I just written Child Home Strangers, Gothic, um, Boys in the Valley.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, maybe I'll just do something different
Mhm.
on this next one. So yeah, so I wrote it as a novel. So that idea has been around for a while, but I just wrote the book a couple years ago. So no, all this stuff I'm writing pretty much as it's coming out. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't uh no, it just like sort of happened this way. I mean, I wrote Boys in the Valley was another one where it
Yeah.
was another story where I'd written the screenplay. Because I was a working screenwriter for a while
Mhm.
back around the 2010, give or take. Um, and so I had these ideas that I'd written that were never made or would never produced. And so rather than just throw the baby out with the bathwater, I repurposed them,
Mhm.
Boys in the Valley specifically, and Third World Time Travel specifically. Those two were screenplays that I adapted into novels. But yeah, but everything else I'm pretty much writing as is. I have Gothic is being reissued in
Mhm.
November, and Child Home Strangers is coming out in paperback this October, and obviously Autumn Springs is coming out in September. And the next year I have another novel called Sarafina
Mhm.
that's coming out that I wrote last year as well. And then right now I'm writing Gothic 2, which is
Mhm.
coming out at the end of next year. So yeah, no, all this stuff is I'm kind of
Like
writing full
current.
time. And yeah, it's all current. Nothing. The only no trunk novels. Uh, everything is everything is current. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I mean, I love that. I love the. It's one of those things that if you can get the idea and it's fresh in your mind too, it's nice that you can get it on paper and start putting it out there. There are some stories that are great that people have like percolated over the years and so on and so forth. But I also feel like if you really like a story, the Autumn Springs Nursing Home Massacre is a unique spin on slasher final girl a thing. But if you had sat on that for years, it's possibly it could be a completely different book, and not even in a positive way, not like oh, I was able to fine tune that book. Sometimes it ends up turning into something completely different because you rethink and you think twice about maybe the direction you're going in that book. So sometimes it is nice to just get it on paper and out, and so your story,
Yeah.
that your original story is actually was actually hitting shelves, not the original story, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think it's yeah, I think there's an element where you want a story to gestate a little bit.
Hmm.
But for the most part, when I have an idea and it excites me, I just want to write it.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I don't I think there's two kind of way, like Boys in the Valley is an example of a story that I've been living with for quite a while. So when I wrote the novel, it was just like a sneeze. I wrote that novel in 4 weeks. I wrote because I knew that story inside and out. I knew the characters inside and out. Um, so it was very liberating
Yeah.
almost to write it as a novel because I feel like it kind of reached the form it was originally supposed to be in
Mhm.
that story to tell that story properly. And whereas Autumn Springs, like I said, was just like this idea. I mean, it went from, my wife and I were in Virginia touring for Boys in the Valley, like I said, and we were staying at this kind of like mountaintop hotel, and where they had these old brick buildings, and this kind of it was beautiful, surrounded by
Yeah.
green rolling hills, and like it was very Virginia. It was
Yeah,
gorgeous,
exactly. Yeah.
and we were just walking around one night, and I said, "This place seems more like a retirement home than a hotel." And then by the time then we got back to our room, and I was jotting notes, and then the next morning I got up, I couldn't sleep. I was thinking all night. I was thinking about this idea, and I got up the next morning and I knocked out 2 paragraphs,
Mm.
called it the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, wrote a 2 paragraph synopsis, emailed it to my agent, who immediately emailed me back and said, "I love the idea." And then like a few days later, I was in New York City again touring,
Yeah.
continuing the tour, and my editor at Nightfire was there at my event, and we went to a bar before the event and had a beer or whatever, and I said, "Hey, I've got this idea," and I just kind of pitched her the idea over the in the bar,
Hmm.
and she's like, "I love it, let's do it." And so that was Autumn Springs. And to your
Yeah.
point, um, originally that story was supposed to be, at least in my head, it was going to be a little more darkly comic.
Okay.
Um, it still has some of that in there. There's
Hmm.
still some funny. You've read it, right? You
Yeah.
you know, and but between me pitching it to my editor and me turning that book in, both of my parents passed away, and
Okay.
over difficult circumstances. And in one case, my dad had dementia, and I had to take care of him for a couple months, and then my mother passed away shortly thereafter. And so, kind of to your point, the book, as I was writing the book, it became very different. It became much more
Yeah.
personal, and I wanted to really, and I think a much better book before it, because I really wanted to get into some themes, some heavier themes about aging and about how we treat the elderly. And also because I'd had these conversations with my parents while they were going through a very difficult period at the end of their lives, um, how they think about dying and how they
Hmm.
think about being sick and how they think about care and and how that affects their families and their kids, and it was just there was a lot to unpack, and so I kind of used it as a cathartic experience
Hmm.
when writing the novel to kind of unpack a lot of that psychological trauma and emotional kind of baggage that I was dealing with at that time.
I mean, the book itself. I mean, I have it right here too. The advanced copy. The book itself has that mixture of serious moments and that some dark comedy and things like that, which I think the balance is great. I mean, like Scream, for an example, as a slasher, iconic slasher film, is like making fun of itself in the sense the whole
Right.
time, right? Like that's the whole idea. But I think it's a little bit of that here, but there's also a little bit of more seriousness. You mentioned the real life horrors, how sometimes we treat the elderly or elderly get treated by a certain people, nursing home lives and all that stuff. There's a bunch of stuff in there that makes it for a different than what I thought it might be, which in a good
Mhm.
way, like in a way that I was like, this is gonna be slapstick almost the whole time. Like in my mind, I went to read it and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like one of those like maybe jokes here and jokes there, and it's just gonna be like the name of it. I mean, it's a nursing
Right.
home massacre. It's not like something that you typically see on the shelf and you want to pick up. So I think that alone, I think it's one of those things that is a brewery in my town, my area right here, called Gagan's Brothers Brewing Company, who has a beer called Smiling Irish Bastard, and it was a guy's nickname, a guy's name. People go, oh, look at that smiling Irish bastard over there. He was a police officer in the area. And so it's a name, it means something, but I think they sell a lot of beer because of the name. Like
Sure.
I think it's one of those things like, oh, I want to order one of those off the menu because I get to say bastard to the waitress and I'm not like upsetting someone or
Right.
something. But
Right.
the name of this book is gonna make people go, I gotta find out what the hell's going on in this book, just for the
Yeah.
name. And I think that's huge to this book, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those names where it just like I said, it's popped into my head the the morning after I originally conceived of the idea, and it stayed that way throughout the process. And I think it brings a lot of energy, as a
Yeah.
title, and it's and it's deadly accurate too. But yeah, another thing about the humor and
Yeah.
a lot of the also, and this is less to do with my personal circumstances, but the other thing I realized when I was writing the book is that a lot of the things that I thought would be funny were super not funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like I had in my head when I was outlining the book, I was like, oh, and then I'm going to have like this happen, and I'm going to have this series, this chapter where, and I won't spoil anything, but
Mm.
where some of the residents are reaching out to their families, and I'm like thinking, oh, this is going to be, it's going to be funny. I'm gonna drop some dimes in there, and it's going to be people are going to chuckle. And then when I was writing it, I was like borderline like in tears. I was like, this is the
Yeah.
most horrible thing I've, I and yeah. So I think a lot of it also just, and that's part of the process of writing anything is
Mhm.
one thing about me as a writer is I'm very big on tone.
Mhm.
So what I mean by that is before I even start a project, before I start writing a story or a book, I want to know what's the tone of this story. Um, because I write my books very differently. Gothic is written very differently than Boys in the Valley, which is written very differently than Third World Time Travel, which is written very differently from Us Child Home Strangers. Um, Sarafina, which is coming out next year, is much more paced than probably anything I've written. Um, because it's more atmospheric, right?
Mhm.
Whereas time travel is more of a thriller, where that sort of thing. But tone is important when I'm writing, when I'm sitting down to write something, because I'm like, okay, is this darkly comic? Um, is it action? Is it a thriller? Is it dark horror? Is it you know? And so that and so I think this is an example of a book where the tone definitely shifted during the writing of it. And that I think that's the only time that's really happened to me,
Mhm.
where I started a book thinking it was going to be one thing and it ended up being something completely different. I think that has a lot to do with the circumstances that I mentioned, my personal
Yeah.
circumstances, but I think also I think the story kind of evolved on me a little bit, and I found myself, and also I fell really hard for my main character, Rose, and
Mhm.
sometimes when characters take on a real vibrancy, when they take on a real depth, it can affect me as the writer too. Because now all of a sudden they're sort of I'm seeing the world through their eyes a lot
Mhm.
more than I anticipated. And all of a sudden I'm seeing things a little bit differently than maybe uh, Philip Fracassi would see. Um,
Yes.
so, so that was an interesting part of the process as well.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, as a huge horror fan myself, I'm probably biased in this comment, but I feel like it's one of the great things about horror. I feel like if you set out to write a comedy and comedic book and you decided to change things up, make it more serious and things like that, I think at that moment the publisher would have been like, this is not what we signed up for. But like with the
Yeah,
horror, I feel like horror can be so much, so many things. It can be comedic, it can be dark, it can be serious, it can be all these things, and still have that horror vibe and that slasher vibe in this book. I think that's what this. You're not lucky, but you're lucky that it is a horror book. Because if you did set out to you write a completely slapstick comedy novel, and then you went through this stuff in your life, you might have shelved this book and been like, "Yeah, this is not the
yeah.
time for this book right now. I have to figure out something else." But you were able to kind of like, mold it and do what you want with it because of your life circumstances and make it into what it is now. I think that's the horror genre for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I reached out to my editor at one point during the writing process, and I said, "Look, just so you know, the tone on this book is changing." And she was
Yeah,
like, "That's fine." She
that's
wasn't worried about it. And she knew why, so I think
yeah,
that was part of it too. But yeah, no, you're 100% right, and it's interesting because when you say what you say about horror is 100% true, and I think about my novel Gothic, and um, which I purposely, you mentioned Scream. I purposely
Mhm.
wanted Gothic to be um, a straight down the middle horror novel, but also like an homage
Yeah.
to the horror novel, and it's also like it's very it's a little bit meta,
Mhm.
much like Scream, and um, and that was another novel that I thought was going to be really fun. Like in my head, I was like, oh, this is going to be like a Sam Raimi Evil Dead
Yes.
kind of tone. And I think I thought that right up until the time I put it out. And then people were like, dude, this is a really messed up book. And it's super, super dark. And I was like, oh, so you didn't think it was like funny? And they're like, no, it was like super dark and and but I also think of Boys in the Valley as like a sweet coming of age story. And
Mhm.
apparently it's got a
It's-
ton of like apparently people see it as a like this much more horrific. But yeah, it's funny that what I necessarily think a book is or the way I approach it is not necessarily how it's received, which is
yeah.
fine. I mean, it's subjective and it's art, and it's just people. I think also, when you read something, it's a lot of it has to do with where you are at as a
Hmm.
reader in your life,
Hmm.
what your
Hmm.
situation is. Is it something that it's affecting you a certain way, maybe more because of what you're dealing with on a personal level? So I think it's such a wonderful, the whole reading and writing art form is such a special gift that we have as humans because I think it allows empathy to seep through
Hmm.
from one person to another and almost this telepathic faction of fiction and as a vehicle and it can be it's really interesting to me how different people react to different books and even if you read a book at one part of your life and then reread that same book
Yep.
20 years later how different that book hits you and how different it feels and so it's really fascinating to me.
It's I think I saw on it might have been Goodreads somewhere out there. There was someone who did a review and said that they can't wait till this book is made into a movie many years from now, and Jamie Lee Curtis is plays Rose in this movie, just as like a whole like circle thing there. And I was like, that's actually kind of funny. It would be a weird like thing. The problem with that is though, I feel like when people go to watch it, you wouldn't be able to take it as serious as you would hope that you'd take the movie is serious because you're not
Yeah,
picturing but I do now after someone said that now I can picture Rose as that face is my I can only picture an older version of Jamie Lee Curtis as Rose now I can't get that in my head.
yeah, I mean she's a wonderful actress.
Yes.
I could see her pulling it off. I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's yeah, it would be cool. There is some movement on that side of things. So
Yeah.
hopefully it comes to fruition that one day we can see this
Yeah.
story as a movie or TV series. Yeah, I've had a couple stories now that have been adapted or in the
Yeah.
process of being adapted. So it's kind of fun to go into that arena and to see things that I've created um
Hmm.
sort of reimagined for a different medium. So
I
this is
just
this is definitely a story I could see making that leap.
I just had a conversation. Adam Caesar, his Clown in the Cornfield, obviously
Hmm.
movie is in the theaters right now. Just had a conversation with him a couple podcasts ago about getting your work adapted and so on and so forth. And then I've had a conversation with Jay Bon and Singa, how he got a Killer's Game took 30 years from the first option to when it actually hit screen. It was a 30-year journey. So there's this gap between how quickly some things go and stuff like that. So I'm always like,
Oh yeah.
I love a story. Like I do love the story, and the reason why I want more of the Autumn Spring Nursing Home Massacre is not just because I want your film to be adapted or your book to be adapted. It's because I like the book, so why not see the next thing? Like we're always, oh, sequels or you reread something or rewatch something. I'm like, I want more of that story. So if it's a different iteration of the same story, that'd be great. I mean, I literally, Christopher Golden was just up in my area. We did
Hmm.
a beer. I work for a brewery. And we did a beer for the Nightbirds, and so he came up and had a discussion. And he was talking about how he's writing the screenplay for the last House of Last Resort. And he was saying he was changing some things in it, and he's the one writing the screenplay. And so I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's interesting." So you have it's for a different medium. Sometimes need those tweaks, and so you have just mentioned twice that you've done, or you probably did it more than twice, but like you just mentioned now, that a couple of your books were originally screenplays and now they're books. Getting, say, time travel, for example, if you were to put that back into screenplay form, would that old screenplay be thrown away and started anew now because it's based off of a
Oh.
book? Is that how that
Oh
would
yeah.
work? Yeah.
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. I
Yeah.
mean, it's I you know it's pretty ironic because
Yeah.
those I've had I've had a lot more success getting my books and stories adapted
Yeah.
into movies than I ever did having my screenplays actually made into movies.
Yeah.
So I much prefer doing it this way because that way I can write it the way I want to write it, and then I can let some poor schmuck try and figure out
Yes.
what all the
That was,
executives
yeah.
want the screenplay to look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've also adapted yeah, so I've adapted I did write the screenplay for one of my short stories called Death My Old Friend. And the producer and the director who optioned it hired me to write the screenplay. And it was, to your point, what was interesting about with Christopher Golden
Mm.
um, is they hired me to write the screenplay, and I wrote the screenplay. Uh, and then they kind of, and then I did a second draft, and the director just kind of said, like, you know what, I think I want to do something really different. You know, I want to kind of get away from um, this this
Yeah.
perspective. And can we do that? You know, can you kind of throw a bunch of notes and ideas? I mean, I said, and I actually said, I said, you know, I wrote the original story. So this is my perspective of this
Mhm.
story. And it's really hard, you know, it's one thing because it's one thing like with Christopher saying, like changing elements of the book.
Yeah.
Like I definitely, like I expanded, like Death My Old Friend is a very,
Yeah.
very short story that I expanded into a
Yeah.
2 hour movie. So I added a lot of stuff or whatever. But the vibe or you know
Yes.
the base idea of what I had written was what I wrote in the screenplay. And I said if you want something dramatically different than what I'm writing, that you need to hire somebody else
Mhm.
because I can only give you my version of this story because
Mhm.
I wrote the story, you know. And that happens a lot in screenwriting too, is which is why you see so many different screenwriters thrown at a project. On one hand, a lot of it is they're accumulating ideas like, oh, this guy had a good idea, we'll steal that. This guy had a good idea, we'll steal that. And we'll put it all in as one thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's also like we just need a fresh
Yeah.
take on this idea, on this core idea. So I still write screenplays. I've written a couple based on my own. I wrote another one called The Code, which is based on my story Mandala. Um, but for like Failsafe and Alter,
Yeah.
um, those are movies that are being rewritten by other screenwriters and directed by other directors, and it's been fun to be part of that process. But yeah, I'm also very interested to see because I've worked very closely with both all the writers who
Mhm.
have written those, both Alter and Failsafe, and they've asked me, given me the screenplays and asked for feedback or notes or whatever. Um and for me, I just love seeing somebody else's take on
Yeah.
the original idea. And I'm just happy if, like, some of what I originally wrote is retained. But I'm also very just as excited to see a completely different approach. And I think for me, creativity is that's what creativity is
Yeah.
all about. And for me, it's like if I'm inspiring you to do something unique and interesting, then that's for me that's as exciting as if you were to
Hmm.
take my book word for word. Um, so it's a fun part of the process, but I much prefer writing the books and stories, um, and then handing it off to somebody with
Yeah.
a big God bless kind of thing. Because
We do with
screenwriting's tough. Screenwriting
we
is tough.
yeah, I can imagine we do with I do with we do books, we do with comics, movies, TV, all that stuff here, and so we've had discussions multiple times about people who are very upset about how an adaptation goes or how it looks on the screen or oh, they changed this person from a male to a female. Da, 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 da. To me, I've always been like, I'd be bored if I went to read
Yeah.
to watch the third rule of time travel and I watched put my book down in front of me and been like, yep, okay, they're saying that word from the book, or they're saying, I will say I never had read Harry Potter until the past 12 months. I read all of them, and
Yeah.
the first couple of books are basically there's like full paragraphs that are spoken on screen. And so the
Yeah.
last book where it's like there's like a touch from the book come out of the book into the movie. And so there's this thing where I'm like, I want the new iteration of something. I want this, like, oh, I did create this person who came from Boston, Massachusetts, but really it makes more sense for them to be from Chicago or whatever. Like
Right.
there's these things that are small that you can do. And I do think that, having someone else do it, but also having yourself do it too, like be like, oh, I could change that up. That makes sense. After I wrote the book, got that out there, didn't like how it
Yeah.
played. Now I'm going to do it this way. And so there is
Yeah.
that side of things. I'd rather see a slightly different, not big time. I don't want like an entirely different plot, but I think just
Right.
slight changes make me go, yeah,
Like the lawnmower man,
yes. Very good
the classic
example right there. Well, I mean, I'm
example.
thinking comic book side, back in the 90s or 70s, whatever, there was a Captain America movie that Captain America was a lawyer. And it was like, okay, that's like
Mhm.
a completely different character. It was like they didn't want to go the
Yeah.
military route at all, and they made Captain America a lawyer in the movie. I'm like, that
Weird.
pulls away so much from the actual original story. But if you made
Yeah.
Captain America a little bit taller or brown haired instead of blonde, like whatever. But like, yeah, if you completely have a different profession, it's one of those
Yeah.
weird things that didn't really work. And so, yeah, I could see, Lawnmower Man's a great example.
Yeah, and sometimes with movies too, is you have to make changes because it's just now you're dealing with real
Yeah,
life,
yep.
but issues. You're dealing with locations and you're dealing with special effects and you're dealing with all that kind of stuff. So you sometimes you can't do all the stuff you do in a book
Hmm.
where there is
Hmm.
no budget. There is no budget on a novel, but there is a budget on a screenplay, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So sometimes it has a lot to do with that as well. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I don't think for the most part, there are some stories where I think I would like to, where maybe I'd probably be a little more precious about
Mhm.
the
Yes.
story and wanting to be more involved or wanting to maybe even, have try and write the screenplay. Um, you know, especially like, if the novels, if any of the novels got adapted, I mean, Autumn Springs, has been optioned and
Yeah.
that's I'm not gonna really be involved with too much with the writing of that, but I would love to see like if Child Alone with Strangers were to get
Mm.
adapted, if Boys in the Valley were to get adapted, I could see writing those screenplays or at least throwing my hat in the ring
Mm.
because I know those stories so intimately, uh, and I know how I'm a very visual writer because like I said, I was a screenwriter. I had some movies produced, and so I get a very good sense of how it would work on
Mm.
film. Um, but again, sometimes it's all case by case. When you're working in this field, you never know how involved you're going to be, how much the filmmakers are going to
Mm.
want you involved, or the creators are going to want you involved, and sometimes you're just like you don't, sometimes you're completely in the dark, and sometimes you're on the phone with the screenwriter every other week. So
Yes.
it depends, but for the most part, to answer your initial question, I'm pretty happy just like letting people do what they want to do.
Do it, yeah, and take over. It makes sense. And
Yeah.
like I said, and you found a niche. I tell you right now. I mean, if I mention your name to someone who's into reading in horror novels or horror genre in general, they're like, "Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan," and I am too. I've been a fan, and that was one of those weird things. I'm like a fan. I become a fan of the genre, right? I'm a fan of something like I'm a fan of comic books or a fan of horror or whatever. and I like to watch, read, listen to things that are in that genre. But I also become fans of authors themselves, and so I
Hmm.
read most of what's going on. Daniel Kraus, one of my favorite authors. He's written such a wide variety and range of books, but they all
Yeah,
have like they feel like a Daniel Kraus novel. Same, and that's what I felt like with reading D7. Then I read Third World Time Travel, and then Autumn Springs. It's like Third World Time Travel was like completely different. But the best part is that my wife doesn't like horror.
yeah.
But I was like, oh, I really like this author, so read this book. And so I gave her that book. I was like, there's no way she's reading this or D7. I tell you that right now. But she was
Yeah.
able to read and really liked the Third World Time Travel. And I think that was great. I think it's one of those things you can branch up. Do you have people that like were mad that it wasn't a horror book, or is it like, do you think that they're the people who just didn't want to read it just don't read it because it's not horror? Is that how that works? I
Um,
mean,
no, there's been some there's been, I want to call it backlash. There's been
but
some negativity, yeah, from people who are big fans of like Child Alone with
yeah,
Strangers, Gothic, Boys in the Valley. And I think a lot of people feel, and I shouldn't say a lot of people,
yeah,
there have
some
been
people,
people who have come back at me with regarding time travel
yeah,
and even Autumn Springs,
yeah, oh
who
yeah,
have said like, oh, he's going soft or oh, he's going mainstream. And I'm like, I just write what I want to
yeah,
write. And I mean, I wrote a children's book called Boy with the Blue Rose Heart. I wrote a book of poetry. Like I wrote a book called Don't Let Them Get You Down, which is not genre fiction at all. It's about
yeah,
depression and anxiety. And so, and it's all under my name. Like when I wrote
yeah,
that science fiction book, Orbit, the publisher, was kind of like, we think, we should probably come up with a pseudonym or at
yeah,
least an alternate use of your name, like my middle initial or something to
yeah.
differentiate it. And that's more for booksellers so they know.
Yeah.
But I was and I was okay with like if they wanted to add like my middle initial or something. But I said, but it's my book. I want my
Mm-hmm.
name on it. And yes, I do run into some confusion with readers. Like I have a YA novel right now that's
Yeah.
being shopped, and my agent and I were like, do I change my name for the YA novel because I don't want 15-year-old
Yeah.
kids to be like, oh my God, I love this author so much. I'm going to go read Gothic and then be scarred for life.
Yes.
So, or maybe I do want that, but like I'm sure you and I were,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
like welcome to the club. But so yeah, so it's interesting that whole thing. But to Daniel Kraus
Yeah.
is a great example where he is so varied, and I think his creativity is a little bit like mine in that we kind of write what we
Yeah.
want to write and what excites us at that moment. In that moment, we talked about that a little earlier, and for me, it's all about what energizes me and what's exciting for me to write about. Like my next book is definitely horror, which is going to be a sequel to Gothic called Gothic: The End. And for folks listening to this, it's that first book is out of print until
No.
November
Remember.
because
Yeah.
I switched publishers. But then Gothic 2 will come, and that's definitely horror lovers horror, we'll call it. And then after that, I don't really know what I'm going to write next.
Hmm.
I'm kind of I have definitely some ideas that are very much in line with the horror stuff that I have written. I also have a thriller that I'm interested to write. Um, and I have a non-genre book that I'm curious to maybe get into. So yeah, so I try not to worry about that stuff. That said, I don't want to say I've done myself a disservice,
Mm.
but I definitely have. I think readers would prefer. I think a lot of readers would prefer their authors be consistent.
Hmm.
With like a Riley Sager, I always know what I'm
Yeah.
getting with a Riley Sager book. You
Yeah.
always know what you're getting with a
Yeah.
Frida McFadden book. You always know
Yes. Yeah.
whatever. I'm just not built that way, and I just want to.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in kind of exploring different things, and I like writing books and stories in different styles. I like writing
Yeah.
pulpy stories. I like writing sci-fi stories. I like writing, noir. I like writing contemporary stuff. So, and I like changing the way I write different things to
Hmm.
express. To kind of fit the tone of the story, to fit the pacing of the story. So all that stuff excites me as a writer. So I don't ever want to just be churning out the same stuff over and over and over again. But I do think that has complicated my career. I mean, to be honest, it's probably
Yeah.
negatively affected my career because publishers don't really know what they're
Yeah.
going to get from me. Um, and so I do think, so yeah, so whatever, but it's just,
I mean,
it
I,
is what it is.
I could see if someone was upset that you come out with a book every 2 years. So between someone who's a big fan of yours, 2 years ago you came out with the book, then it's this, then it's time travel, and then
Right,
it's 2 years. So you're 4 years in between a book that you really want to read from you that's in the genre that they want or the style they want. But I
right.
mean, for people who wanted like a D7 that came out right around the same time, and then you have Autumn Springs coming out in the fall, fall. So it's like this book is just it's not like you were just stagnant for a while. This is like you had
Right.
books that are coming. So it's like you just wait. There's a bunch of stuff out there now from a bunch of great authors. So like in the horror genre right now. So just grab something else. And if you didn't want to read that, then don't read it. Like it's not like no one's forcing you to. Or if
Yeah,
you're a
right.
completionist like some people, then you just need to buy everything that says Philip Fracassi on it. Then do that too. But I'm just saying
I
like
love those
you know.
people.
And,
Yeah.
I would be
No,
more upset if I fell in love with your writing from reading the Third World Time Trial because I went to a bookstore and grabbed that, and then I'm like, oh, what's his next book coming out? That's
yeah,
where I'd more afraid.
now sci-fi fans might be disappointed because I'm
Yes,
probably not going to write another sci-fi novel for a while, although Orbit would love one. But
yes,
I, that was kind of like that. Sci-fi for me is, it, it was definitely a departure.
yeah,
And so what I mean by I don't have like a ton of sci-fi ideas in my head. I don't read a ton of sci-fi. I do read sci-fi, but I don't read a ton of
yeah.
sci-fi. So it's not like I'm always thinking about science fiction. I'm always thinking about horror
Hmm.
and fun horror ideas because I love this sandbox that is the horror genre. Um, that said, like I mentioned, I do like thrillers. I read a lot of thrillers, and I like the idea of writing. I like the idea of writing maybe like some dark thrillers with some supernatural elements, maybe,
Hmm.
and that's kind of what my books are anyway, to a degree. I mean, they have that kind of thriller pacing to them. At least some of them do. I would argue that that Boys in the Valley is kind of a thriller, even though it's got a lot of horror to it. But yeah, so it's yeah, it's interesting. And to your point, I've been putting out about 2 books a year
Yeah.
since 2020, give or take. So, yeah, there's a lot there. And I have 2 books coming out next year. And I'll probably have at least 1 or 2 books coming out in 2027. So it's not like you get a long wait between
I mean, I've
stories.
always said that about like I said I work for a brewery, and they're always like, "Oh, you should make this beer again." I'm like, there's someone else that makes that similar beers. Just buy theirs and buy ours we're making right now. There's something out there. Like you can get something. So it's not like
Okay,
it's not like you can't buy a horror book that's going to be similar in a sense to yours to get you by if when the publication date came out for Third World Time Travel and it wasn't your thing.
right.
Like I said, if it was me, it's the other side. It's the sci-fi people that are gonna be more upset if they really like that book. There isn't coming anything coming, in my
Yeah,
opinion. But as a comic book fan, I'm excited for your horror future because you got a creep show story coming. I wanted to touch on
yes.
that really quickly. And that comes out. The first issue comes out in September. Do you know which issue you're in?
I do not know what
Okay,
issue I'm in. All I know is that
it's in the fourth
I'm
volume.
it's right, it's in the fourth volume. I think I'm probably in. I think there's 5 issues in
Yes.
the fourth volume. I'm probably in 3 or 4, and the reason I think that is because the holiday issue.
Okay.
So since it starts in September and probably goes October, November, I'm
Yeah.
assuming I'm in like the December, January range. Because my story was definitely a
Holiday centric.
holiday story, and Creep Show guys are cool with me saying that
Yeah.
they just don't. I don't think they know 100% yet which
Which
one I'm
yeah.
in. So, but yeah, that was such a great experience. I was very fortunate to connect with the guys at Skybound
Skip on yeah.
and Creep Show and to work with the editors over there, and they were great. And I hope I get to do it again. It was so much fun. They were so inclusive of me. Where
Yeah.
like I got input on who the artist would be. I got input. I got to see all the early sketches and all the early um, uh, you know dialogue work and all.
Yeah.
I'm butchering it. I know in
Yeah.
the comic book world it's called
Yeah.
something
Lettering.
cooler,
Yeah.
but lettering. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, all that stuff was great, and so it was such a great experience, and the story is really fun. So yeah, I'm excited for that to come. It's called "Will You Please Be Quiet."
That's
is the
that's
name of
that's
my
just so cool. And it's one of those things that I have this affinity for both prose novels and comic books. And so like and I just we had Christopher Golden up here and we had Clay McLeod
yeah
Chapman up here recently and Daniel Kraus is another one, Adam Caesar's another one. All you authors that I really 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 enjoy. A lot of those people I just mentioned just also have written comic books over the years.
yeah.
Actually, I did not realize until more recently that this right here is the sequel to Waterworld. The
What's it
movie that
called?
it's called Waterworld:
Oh,
Children of the
it is Waterworld.
Leviathan. It's the
Oh,
sequel to Waterworld that was written by Christopher Golden for comic form,
oh,
where
I
they
didn't know he did
actually
that
they
one.
me either. And I was like doing some research and so on and so forth. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to
Is
read
that
this.
supposed to be Kevin Costner on the
I
cover?
don't know. It's very bad if it is. I tell you that
It
much.
doesn't look like
But
Kevin
I'm
Costner.
excited to read it because I was like, oh, but he told me like it's basically they discover like that there's not enough water on Earth to flood the Earth like Waterworld. So they needed to come up with some story, and they asked Universal, "What should we do?" And they're like, "I don't know. It's your comic. You write it. You figure it out." And so he
Yeah.
did figure it out in that comic book series. They do figure out how the water flooded the Earth, and that was like
No.
fascinating to me. So I'm like, oh, this comic book crossover is so cool. And so hearing and loving your writing, in the novel format, I'm excited to see, in crossover to comics because as comics is a big thing to me. And I think that I
Yeah.
started getting into reading more, reading comics because it wasn't as big of a task to me. It was I could get this done quickly and I could do it without frustrating myself. And so in the future,
Yeah.
I was able to read novels. But yeah, so comics are to me are going to always be this big thing. And I think that you getting into this and doing a story for Creepshow is awesome. It's also Creepshow, which is badass.
Yeah, it's super right. It's a total bucket list, right? I would
Yeah,
love to do more comics too. I have friends who write, as you mentioned, Chris,
yeah,
and
yeah.
others who are writing. Have you ever? I was curious when you were talking. Have you
Yeah.
ever interviewed Benjamin Percy?
I have not. Yeah, he's on a list, but
You got to
not
get
a
him
chance. So
on,
Benjamin's
man.
awesome. Yeah,
He
Benjamin's.
has
Yeah,
been
yeah, yeah.
cranking out
Hmm.
comics lately. He's
Hmm.
the, um, and what a great writer he is.
Yes.
But
Oh,
anyway, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and a great guy. You'd love to have him
Yeah.
on. He's a really sweet guy. But anyway, but yeah, it's something I would love to get more into. Now this is just a story, so it's part of
Yeah.
like an
Yeah.
anthology, right? But I would love to write at some point. I would love to have the opportunity to write like a full comic.
Yeah.
And I've pitched Skybound like an idea, and that's we may we'll
Yeah.
probably continue talking. And
Yeah.
but I wrote a novella called Commodore,
Yeah.
which takes place in this world I created called Sabbath. It's a town of Sabbath, which is sort of a hybrid of Lovecraft and Ray Bradbury. Small town, 50s with monsters in it. And there's a whole lore behind it. And I've written a few short stories that take place in Sabbath. And I really love the idea of Sabbath being like a comic book and
Hmm.
having all these different weird stories that take place, month in and month out as a comic book series. So that's kind of like my little dream that's
Yeah.
over here when I that hopefully one day I'll get to do something like that. But yeah, comics are great. And the only thing I never got into super into comics, and I'll tell you why, because my brother when I was growing up was a huge comic book guy, and I do read a lot of comics. I
Yeah.
prefer I prefer the omnibuses or the
Yes.
graphic
Yeah.
novels because my problem was I would read a comic and I would read it so fast that it would be over,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, well, now I got to wait a month, and then find out what happens next. And it was like, so for me, it was just happened too. It was too quick. It was like and so
Yeah.
so that kind of kept me from getting super into them. But I do like, I like getting like the omnibuses with like
Yeah.
the whole run in there, and I can just kind of go from beginning to end. Because that's probably the fiction reader in me, or the
Yeah. Yeah.
that wants to know the whole story at once.
Yeah, and
I'm,
it's a big thing
I,
right now. I think it's also a transition in the market. I think it's a lot of that people who are what they call in the comic book industry is trade waiting, and then you're waiting for that
okay,
trade paperback of the comic book, the 5 issues all together. The
yeah,
downside is they announce Creepshow Volume 4 coming out in September, issue 1, and that trade won't come out until March of 2026. So in a comic book world, we find out about things
right,
closer and the publication date is closer and obviously in the fictional novel and prose world it's like no you're promoting this book for a year before it comes out.
yeah,
Comic books is a lot of like you like get a solicitation guide that the book comes out in 6 weeks, and so there's
right.
a really random difference in that. But with you coming from the world of books, doing a graphic novel or some sort of something like that would actually work because that's also part of the book market. It goes to bookstores. It can be on the shelf next to Autumn Tree's Nursing
Yeah.
Home Massacre or something like that too. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and it
it's
was
a fun
fun
world. Yeah, yeah,
writing. I learned a lot writing that. I never written a comic script
yeah.
before, so learning that was very exciting for me and super fun. It was just a different flexing a different muscle,
Yeah.
doing something completely different than it's different than even because I've done the
Yeah.
screenwriting we talked about, and I've done
Yeah.
fiction, and I've done all this other stuff, but it's even different than all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's its own thing for sure.
It's
Yeah,
definitely,
it's
and it's one of
cool.
those things that, like, some stories are made for comics, some are made for prose novels, some are made for movies, TV, so on and so forth. So there are some that, but there are also some of the ones that kind of like can do everything and be in different forms and things like that. And it's a
Yeah,
visual medium, so if anybody likes movies, comics are in that sense too. It's that you work with another person. That's the other difference, is that you're actually having to rely on someone else. You
yeah,
a book, you're like, okay, it's me, and if my editor says change this, I change that or do this or whatever. But really, it's all me. And so with a comic, you're like, cool, let's talk about this with someone else. And in an anthology,
yeah,
they probably got, I mean, Creep Show people, Skybound are probably all, like you said, mentioned input in idea, here and there. But like, you obviously, it's your story, but there's a group of people that are really trying to like get this thing made,
yeah.
and so
And the
it's really cool.
artist is
Yes.
such a huge I mean, bigger than even I had
Yeah.
fully realized, because I'm basically saying like, I don't want to give
Yeah.
away my story, but I'm basically saying like, okay, and then this thing sort of
Yeah.
looks like this, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Here's maybe a couple of visuals, and then they create this thing, and I see it, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so much better than I ever
It's
could have
not even what I had.
imagined.
It's what I
So
had
much
pictured in my head, but it's so
cooler.
much better. It's
Yeah,
so
and
much cooler.
and that's what makes comics fun, is
Yes.
that's what makes it so, to your point about
Yeah.
it's a graphic medium. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just kind
Yeah.
of throwing in, I'm just going to keep, and you're so limited in what you
Yeah.
can say with words, which I think is great. And so really, as a writer, you're really like, okay, what really needs to be
Yeah.
here so that
Hmm.
readers understand what's going on. And it was, so yeah, it was really fun. And
That's awesome.
I can't wait for my Creep Show story to come out.
Yeah.
I hope people love those that next volume. I think it's gonna be fun.
And to me, it's like, for people, I'm a fan of your writing. So, like, to me, it's one of those things that I've always saw it as another avenue for people to know who you are and to
Yeah,
potentially jump into different things. So, like, I've always been, even someone who's writing novels for years, like, oh, they went over and wrote a comic book. And now I feel like, okay, those people are going to go over and the opposite side of things. People who've written comic books for a while have go over and write a novel. I think there's that crossover. And I think that, you get some new fans, some new readers. And so there's that too. But like, to me, those people who are a big fan of yours, and all of a sudden, oh, you're in the industry that I love too. This is really cool seeing you. Now you're a comic book
yeah,
writer as well. You can't just write author, you have to write comic book writer on things now too. You have to
and
change it to
screener.
just
Yeah,
writer, right? I mean, you can't
yeah.
screenwriter, author, your name, your bio is going to get so much longer.
You know what the
Um,
funnest part about that Creep Show thing was, to put a button on
yeah.
it, was writing dialogue for the creep
See?
was
It's
pretty
there's
cool.
it's so that's cool. And that's the thing to me. Like, it's not one of those things where you just came out with your own, create your own book, and it's gonna be
Yeah,
out there and it's your own idea. It's like you're in a world that people would love to be in, and you got a chance to do it, which is really cool. A pinch me moment. But
yeah.
yeah, we're gonna wrap things up here. I'm so glad you were able to come on and talk. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but we didn't have enough times to talk about
Man, go
Santa
see.
Pups. But
Well, how old's your kid? Can you say
he's
on the
four.
air?
Yeah,
No,
he's a four.
that's the man. He'd love it. It's totally it is perfect. 4, 5 year olds.
I'll tell you right now. I watched it this morning. I'm not joking.
Did
It
you
was
watch
fun.
it?
Yeah, I watched it. It was fun.
There you go.
It was
Yeah,
funny because I was mentioning it to someone, and I'm like, oh, Santa Paws. They go, I didn't know there was a Santa Paws one, and I was like, okay, that's a good point there. But yeah,
well, yeah. But it's what's interesting is when you watch it, you probably
yeah,
caught a little bit of that
yeah,
my horror
yes.
mind in there. There's some stuff in there that's a little dark.
Well, that's what's funny
Um,
about it. It's like you look up online, people were like, wow, this is way darker than like on Letterboxd. It was like
yeah,
one of those things like, oh, this is a great film. But like, geez, it's a little darker this thing, and I was like, yeah,
yeah.
that's a good point.
I went dark in SP2, dog. Went dark in that. When I was writing Christmas Cold that Diane Lane was singing
Yes,
or
yeah.
whatever, I would Diane whatever it is, I was like, this is like some messed up stuff. But people think Gothic is dark.
So
That was a lot of fun.
when are
I
you
actually
doing the
wrote
novelization? Are you going to do the novelization of
there
Santa
is a
Claus too? Is
novelization
there
for that I
really?
did not write. Yeah, there is. I didn't write it.
Okay.
If I have it here, I'll show it to you. But yeah, but I actually wrote like 7 Disney movies. That was one of them. But
Yeah,
there's one I got credit for.
yeah. That's. It was just one of those things. It's like, it's funny. I was like, oh, screener. I wonder what he's written before. And I was like,
I
yeah,
love it.
and I'm like, oh, this
Because
is
I love when
amazing. Because you're,
people bring up Santa Claus too, because yeah, man, it's like shows my range. I can do kids, or I can do adult horror, whatever you need.
It's gonna be funny if someone watches this movie as a kid and then later on, for some reason, just gravitates towards horror genre, and then like for some reason has your entire catalog of books, and they don't even realize that's where it started. Was so, well, how'd you get into my books? I watched Santa Paws too. The
Yeah,
Santa
I
Paws. That
became
was
a
right.
yeah,
That's where this started. And
right.
yeah,
For
so
most people, for most of us of our generation, it's like, oh, it started with like The Shining. For people, for the kid, the new generation, it's going to be started with Santa Paws 2,
too. Yeah, there you go.
The Santa
That's great.
Pups.
It's gonna be
Uh,
amazing. People have to wear out the, they have to buy it on digital a number of times.
right.
I don't know, physical media might not be around anymore, but yeah, this is a
Yeah.
fun collection to have. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, talking a little bit about D7, but mostly Autumn Springs Nursing Home Massacre, which hits shelves this September 30th.
So, yeah. September
30th,
30th.
yes, from
Yeah.
Toward Nightfire. Exciting for that. Pick up if you're a sci-fi person or not, and just want to read it. A Third World Time Travel was also phenomenal. Boys in the Valley, all kinds of stuff from Philip. You can go to his website. I think it's just philipfracassi.com. Is that
pfracassi.com. Yeah.
it is big. Okay. So, but yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, chatting, and discussing all these things. I really think that people should go pick up the Autumn Springs Nursing Home Massacre. As I say, it's a fun book, but it's also got some moments in there, and I'm excited for other people to read it. It's one of those things that the downside of reading books ahead of time is you can't really discuss it with anybody else except for those people who also have read it ahead of time. So it's like,
No
my friends, I'm like,
spoilers.
I can't discuss this with someone.
Yeah, it's a spoiler. It's a
Yeah.
spoiler heavy book, so make sure
Yes,
you read it early
exactly.
on. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I really appreciate taking the time. We'll chat again soon in the future. Sound good?
All right, Justin. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Philip.
All right, bye.